So, Neil, in video one, we talked about a continuum of health.
Yes.
So we talked about a continuum of physical health, and then we also talked about a continuum of mental health. I wonder if we could spend some time breaking down a couple of more kind of common mental health struggles on a continuum and kind of break those down together for the audience.
I think that'd be very useful.
So I wonder for the first one, if we could talk through what maybe an anxiety continuum would look like.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're using that same analogy, if you're looking at, we talked about, I think in the first video as well, certain personalities have traits that will be anxious. And there are certain personalities that are not anxious. So, and I think I shared that I have that trait of anxiety. They call it in what they Big Five assessment called neuroticism, which I don't like. But that's what it's called.
I share that with you.
I'm high. I'm higher on that, like a 60%.
Yeah. Okay.
It makes me a good detail person.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's so I'm going to be carrying that. So if you're living with someone that's not high on that, they're like, why are you always anxious or whatever? There are actual traits. So if we're looking at the beginning of the continuum, you're going to start out with that's kind of your foundational. As you go through, you go to like the middle. It's where the anxious thoughts are just like really kind of getting in your way of the day to day, but you're able to deal with it in different ways. And you start to, maybe you don't know how to do that. And that's when you go, like you do breathing, you ground yourself. These are different things that you'll learn if you come to someone professionally, or you might even learn them on the internet nowadays. There's so much stuff on the internet that can help in those things, but you're battling it. And there's different
Would you
interventions.
say those are like worry thoughts?
These are like worry thoughts. It's like lots of different thoughts. It can go from like what it would sound like if you had that kind of temperament. It's like, okay, I've got a leak at my house. Oh, the leak at the house could be causing more damage. It could be causing more damage. If it's causing more damage, then that's going to cost a lot of money. If it costs a lot of money, then, oh my goodness, I don't have a lot of money. And then it can mean I'm bankrupt. I'm actually on the street.
Yeah.
That's where it could go, right? That's
In
like
seconds.
In seconds, right? And for some temperaments, it can go from that kind of thing. And so that's a battlefield. And so that might be like periodically.
Right.
And then when you jump over to the like extreme anxiety, this is actually interfering with your ability to stay present with the people around you, in your job, in your vocation. You will have extreme panic attacks, which feel like a lot of people go to the ER because they think they're having a heart attack or a stroke. You start to have these, and they start to come up, and they're more frequent. And so when you're in that situation, then you're probably at the end of the continuum there. And if it's all the time, and you're trying to battle that, then this is something that we're just really maybe not being able to battle well, and might have to even take medication to help pull that back. And so when you're looking at the end of the continuum there, it's like, okay, this is not just helping just like looking at the internet or different things that I need. There's something that's physiologically going on here, mentally, emotionally is going on. And this is where we need professional help, guidance, and even maybe some medication.
Yeah, I'm wondering too, like, I think if you agree with this, I would put on that more extreme end of the anxiety continuum would be like your phobia disorders or your OCDs or some things that it impacts daily functioning, right? Like some people who they can't even leave their house anymore because the outside world feels so scary, right? Or the anxiety symptoms are impacting them in such a way that they can't even drive anymore.
Yeah,
right?
Fear of the fear.
Yes.
That they just, they're stuck in, isolated and not branching out, not being able to, again, that's that functioning, the daily functioning has now been stifled in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to just add this too, because I know that there's a lot of jokes going around about OCD tendencies, right? I think a lot of people have these tendencies, like you were referencing before. But there's also a continuum with that where it can be more extreme to the point of impacting your ability to do any kind of daily functioning. Right. So in an most extreme, like I have had some experiences with people in its most extreme form where they can't even hold a job because they're so busy washing their hands. Their hands are raw from that, right? Or the fear of the germs, right? It impacts their ability to do any kind of daily life. Versus, I really like a clean, neat house.
Yes.
Which might look more like a tendency.
Right.
On the extreme end of that one might look like if my kids touch or move something in my house, I have like a panic experience.
And you see how that systemically affects the kids?
Yes.
And how they can adopt some of those things in order to try to comply with not making the parent anxious. And so this goes back to that. It's becoming, interfering with the relationships with yourself, others, and even God, right? At that point.
Right.
So, yeah.
And let me say, that's not me. Like, my house is a mess. But I was referring like it was to myself. But I don't have to have a really clean house. I would like one.
Right. Yeah. But we do have those tendencies.
But we have those
count
tendencies.
Things. We
That's
get superstitious type things that we think we need to do.
Yes,
in
I
order
do
for
this
things
weird thing when we're driving down the road. If my husband's driving, I tap my toes to the dot in the line. Very bizarre.
Yes.
Feels like I got to.
Right. And we all have those. Because I remember when I was in school, like I was thinking that when I was in grad school, it was like if I wore brown shoes, I'd make a great grade on my test. Right.
There you go.
So we do have these tendencies.
We have these tendencies, right? But I want to make sure that people understand there's a difference between tendencies and when we move into where it's actually disorder.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we look at I'm kind of looking at it from a biblical standpoint, there's this, churches will say, well, fear not, fear not, fear not. And it does say that over and over again. And we see that in Joshua, fear. And then we see Paul talk about it. And yes, we would like to surrender that serenity to this fear. But in those extreme cases, something is biologically going on that enough scripture, like we need help. We need people to walk alongside. God has given people talent and the abilities to help walk alongside. And so we need to let the people know that, yes, that's true. And one of my favorite verses in Scripture is where Paul writes in Philippians 4:6. And as a person who deals with anxiety, this is my verse, right? So the verse is, do not be anxious about anything. Yeah, Paul. Okay, that's great.
Right.
But in every situation, by prayer and petition, meaning like bring it, surrender it, let it go.
Yeah.
And there's a prayer that I read in a book from John Eldredge called Resilient. It's called Benevolent Detachment. And it's, Jesus, I give you everything and everyone. And it's a breath prayer.
Yeah.
Jesus, I give you everything and everyone. And just like, give me back what I need. And so that's that prayer and petition for me. And then it says, with thanksgiving. And we know the study as therapists, gratitude changes our whole demeanor. So that's really good. And present your request to God, like, I need this right now. And that peace will come over you. Now, that's great. I'm talking about at the beginning of the continuum, in the middle of the continuum. But when we're at that end, we need more. And this is good, but we need more.
Yeah, it's this plus.
Yes, this plus.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that scripture. And I think being able to reference it not as necessarily like a command, fear not.
Yes.
It's an invitation.
Please. Yeah,
it's an invitation.
Right, I love that.
You don't have to.
Right.
And so much of the anxiety disorders are around control, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Because maybe our lives when we were growing up felt out of control.
Right.
And we go back to what we were talking about in the first video. Yeah. When you gain understanding of a person's history, their life, their experiences, then you'll have a better understanding of what's going on with them.
Right. And it can also just be in their genes.
Yes. Right.
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 It's part of the genetic makeup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That plus circumstances.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So I wonder if we could do something really similar, Neil, with depression on a continuum.
Yeah. So this one, I have had loss, a lot of loss in my life. And so loss of loved ones, loss of dreams, loss of material things, that kind of thing. That's naturally going to have sadness around it and grief. And one of the things that I see a lot of my clients come is unprocessed grief. They haven't really worked through the things that they've lost, the little things. And we know this is like a cliche. This is like a bumper sticker or a coffee mug, but it is with every new thing comes loss, right?
Yeah.
So we are always moving to new and losing things and to lose those things. Even as my girls, I got 2 daughters and they're in their 20s, as I think about them and they move from stage to stage, there's a sense of loss there that as they move, but there's newness too, and so for us to recognize those and move to those well. So that's like the beginning of the continuum, and you go in the middle of it, and you've had extreme loss after loss after loss, and then expectations of how life was supposed to look start to just like those expectations are not being met, and you're like holding on to those expectations. Then you can get into this more depressive stuff. Maybe anxiety sometimes. My anxiety had gone into more of a depression because I'm so tired.
Yeah.
And it's like it looks hopeless, like it's too hard. So like absence of hope, and it starts to get to that place. And then you go on further. And that means it's just like it doesn't look like there's ever going to be any hope. It's not going to change my situations, and I'm in that place. We know, I think, and this is my belief, is that when you get to that very far part where it's like mental illness, it means that chemically we are way out.
Yeah.
There's a biological thing going on here. Some people that are, if we talk about bipolar, we talk about the fact that there's mania, and then that's the extreme excitement, and then there's this huge major depression. And these are people I've talked to that can't get off the couch. They don't have the energy to get off the couch. And so that's more extreme. So if I'm talking about the continuum, I'm talking about loss, and then a lot of loss. And then here we are in a place where it's biological and it's also mental and emotional.
I wonder if I could add to that, because even with maybe there wasn't loss for people, but there's periods of, I would say, continuum almost of hopelessness.
Okay.
So sometimes, like I've experienced with individuals where they've had lots of trauma histories where hopelessness or those kind of depressive features, again, like you talked about, are the depletion of certain chemicals, right?
Talk more about the trauma part, because that's really important.
Yeah. So especially when there's a history of chronic trauma, meaning
what would
growing
that look like?
growing up in a home where people who were supposed to be taking care of you were actually hurting you, or not giving you emotional needs, right? Or seeing you, taking care of you.
Yeah,
like you were kind of left to take care of yourself and figure it out on your own, right?
You and I are both attachment people, and we talk about attunement.
Yes.
And like when you were a child and you weren't doing well, did anybody notice?
Right.
And sometimes you just are not noticed. Not that your parents didn't provide or whatever, but you just weren't noticed.
Right.
Right.
And so sometimes what can happen in that place is this internal experience of hopelessness.
Yes. Right.
And when we're in a hopeless state, there's loss of energy, there's loss of motivation.
Yes.
There's a sense of, why should I try? It's useless. It feels futile. And then we can, again, carry that along on the continuum, and on its extreme end, it can be life-threatening.
Yes, it can.
Right.
Because there's no hope.
Right.
And the only solution I find in the moment, where I call a momentary lapse of reason, with lack of support, where you feel like the only way out is through suicide.
Right. Yes. Which in its own way feels like hope.
It does.
It's a hope of it ending
Yes.
the suffering.
And it's not something we want to talk about a lot
Right.
because we're scared of it, but people do get into that place.
That's right.
And this is where we go back again, why we're talking about this. A sense of community. There was a study that came out from Harvard recently. They've been doing this study for 80 years. They followed people for 80 years.
Wow.
And they found out that the thing that brought contentment and happiness was community.
Wow.
We've seen that in Scripture over and over again. And I'm grateful to our scientific folks who've actually proved that out.
Yeah.
But that's when we get so isolated and feel so hopeless through trauma or attachment wounds or what are losses that we do start to feel like there's no hope.
I want to also just share, like, one of the symptoms that's really common with depression is isolation.
Yes.
Right?
Do you talk more about that isolation? Because there's lots of study on that.
Yes. It's this big part of it is that low energy, low motivation. I think sometimes what happens for people is not wanting to burden others with your sadness.
Well, or I have some clients that have been going for so long, they feel like they don't want to go back again to the deal because they're afraid that I'm just being a burden.
Yes. Yeah. They don't want to wear people out.
That's right. Right.
And so there's this this kind of natural then progression of not reaching out, not calling, staying home.
Yes.
Staying. And then oftentimes what can happen is they can get to a place of not even opening windows in the house. It stays dark and everything just starts kind of closing in and closing down. And so that's that isolation process. And so I think one of the things that's important to talk about is if you do know someone that struggles with depression, or a way that the church can be helpful here is noticing when people go missing.
Yes.
When they go silent.
And when we think about the 99, the sheep.
That's right.
Like the 99 and going out looking for the one, right? I love what you're saying there because it's like we need to go out and look for those.
Yes.
Because I hear from, through my practice is no one's coming to look for me anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's really hard. So that's a really good point.
And I think it's a hard, I don't know. I don't know if there's like science behind this, but what I would say is in my own experience and what I've noticed in talking with clients is the longer something goes on, the more people lose interest.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Right?
Which
longer someone's in a battle.
The big word anhedonia. Like I just don't have any interest anymore in the things I loved before.
No, I mean, so let me correct that. So what I mean is the more that someone is in a suffering, right? Or the longer that someone is keeps bringing the same prayer request over and over and over.
Yes.
People start getting tired of that.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the community starts to lose interest.
They want the person to move on. They want this to be okay.
Right? We hear it in grief.
Right. We do.
Right?
Yeah.
Have
we
you been
do
sad
hear it
long
in
enough?
grief. Right.
Right. We say all the awful things to people when in reality, like the first 2 years of grief are the hardest.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
So Neil, as we're working through with each kind of a couple of different kind of common mental health struggles, with continuums, I wonder if we can talk about addiction.
Yeah. So that's something that's really interesting to me and through my years of study. And I'm not an addiction specialist,
Me
okay?
neither.
And there are people that are specialists in this and they know a lot about this and how to handle it. But I'm going to go a real high level here. And one of the things that was a paradigm shift for me was it's the addiction in the brain.
Okay.
I'm a real geek when it comes to like neuroscience. I love neuroscience.
Speaking my language.
Oh, yeah. So when we're looking at that, so I found this, I went to a few trainings just to get a good overview of this. And I came across an article I thought was really good. And it's rewiring. Your brain gets hacked with substances that's chemical and even certain behaviors like gambling or pornography. So that and there's more study on this, like say, I'm not an expert in it, but when we're talking about neuroscience, what we found now is really interesting. So if you forgive me, I'm going to kind of look at my notes because it's really good.
Yeah.
substance abuse and some behaviors act directly on the reward centers of your brain, right? Mm-hmm. And the reward center, one of the things that gives us a high is dopamine. Mm-hmm. And each one of us has different receptor types. So, I even heard that our receptors are allergic to like alcohol. So one person's receptor with alcohol would react with more dopamine than someone else's receptor. Like maybe it doesn't do much for them. So it's interesting. You say, well, why are certain people addicted right away and some people are not? So I can socially drink, but somebody say I can't like that, or I can do this or that. So that really kind of explains, if I understand it correctly, it's more from that. So dopamine is a powerful thing. So what it does is the addiction is actually starts to shortcut your reward system. Which we like reward, you know,
we like to feel good.
Video games and all these different things, that whatever, or chocolate or whatever we need, we want that, and we want that reward because we feel like all the stuff we've been going through the last 3 years, right? We just don't want to feel that. So when you look at that, so over time, repetition becomes very powerful. And so we start to get like these neural paths that bypasses our prefrontal cortex, all right? So this is our executive system, our judgment system. When we talk about that, there's another part of our judgment system, it's an limbic system called the hippocampus that starts to shrink over time. And so you start to say, well, how in the world do these people do this stuff? The people that are addicted, why do they do that? Because their judgment system has been circumvented, right? So when you're looking at that, then these pathways start to join. And so you say, well, why can't they kick it? And why do they do what they do? Like, if they knew if they took it and take another drink, or they're going to put some more drugs into their, or they're going to gamble again or whatever, why would they not do that when they know they got a family over here, they've got loved ones and that kind of stuff, people pleading with them? Because this reward system in their brain is so wired, and they, even if it's negative, they will go towards whatever that addiction is, because that's the reward center in their brain is saying, we need this. Even they know if they quit, it would be positive. So when we start to look at it neurologically, we look at addiction in a totally different manner.
Yeah, and as I was hearing you talk, it helps speak to, I think, family members or loved ones of addicts, because oftentimes what I hear when I'm working with the family members is, why didn't they choose me?
Yes.
Am I not important enough? Right. Am
if
I
I
not
loved
enough?
you, is love not enough? Right.
Right. And so what you're explaining and the way you're talking about how it bypasses that in the brain.
Yes.
Really. Like it's not about that.
Right.
They can love their family.
Yes.
To the nth degree.
Right.
And not be able.
And which makes them feel hopeless, or they're like you were saying earlier, like, okay, I've done this over and over and over and over again. So, you know, what happens? So when someone goes to rehab, as I understand it, when they go to rehab, what they're doing is they're detoxing from this, and their actual emotional system, judgmental system, and their prefrontal cortexes are coming back online after so many days. That's the beauty about how God created our brain. It's neuroplasticity, where we actually can reform that back, but they have to get the help. And they have to be absent of this chemical or whatever that behavior is, so that they can get into it. Even with pornography, as I read that, as people abstain from pornography, their brain, their emotional system, their ability to attach in an intimate way starts to come back on. So we can see that the addiction is a really powerful thing, and how it does hijack the brain.
I wonder if we can just do one quick, myth buster in terms of like the pornography and even sex addiction.
Okay, go ahead.
Because from everything that I've read about, everything that I've studied, like sex addiction and porn addiction, it's not actually about sex.
Right. What is it about?
What is it about?
What it's about wanting intimacy in some way without taking a risk. It's trying to get out of pain is what I would say a firefighter response. I'm trying to put out the fire of pain in order to I just want to feel good for a moment. I just, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's why,
And
that's
it
the way I
doesn't
see
matter
it.
who's in front of me.
Does not matter.
It's the behavior or the action.
That's right.
That gets me the relief.
I just need to put the fire out. The fire of whatever that pain is or whatever I'm dealing with. When we talk about maybe blast, it's like boredom, lonely, angry, stressed, tired. Those are painful things, and I'm just trying to put those out. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, my understanding too from addiction is where it's a lot of time addictive behavior has an origin in the inability to regulate your emotions.
Yes.
And so that what you talked about with that hijacking process, it's like there was never this learned experience of how to experience a safe regulating experience with another person,
Right.
or being taught how to regulate your emotions.
Right.
And so there's this desperation to make the bad feeling
Right.
go away.
So we're looking for this pseudo relationship when we need to go back to what our subject is about congregations and churches being community and being relationship. And when you're having issues and pain, to move towards people instead of towards something else.
Which is so interesting because in the addiction community, so much of the healing process with addictions and recovery is community-based,
community,
isn't
right?
it? Yeah,
That
groups, so many groups
Right.
and all kinds of different ways of building in and getting them tapped into community and sponsors. And
Right.
Yes, and authenticity.
It's awesome.
So I'm curious, I'm kind of shifting gears for just a second, Neil. I wonder, big question, how do you view mental illness spiritually?
I thought about that because I know we were going to talk about it. And here's where I see it. I think a loving God understands our story.
Mic drop. That's good.
It gets me emotional
Yeah.
because he compassionately
That's
looks
right.
at us and tells our story.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I love that.
Yeah.
So when I'm sitting with clients and God knows their whole story, all the experiences, the painful things they've been through, and maybe why they're doing what they're doing. But I look at Jesus coming up and interacting with people in the Gospels and looking at them and saying, I know.
Yes. Yes.
And that means that a safe place to land. And then that means that maybe growth or change or something healthier comes down. It doesn't come down in other ways. There's boundaries.
Yeah.
There's things that are good for us. And a loving God says, this is best for you.
Yeah.
And I know your story, and I know it's been hard.
I even think about the example within the disciples, because we can even look and kind of analyze those disciples and see different mental health struggles.
Right.
Even one, Judas, who ends up committing suicide, right?
Right.
But what's interesting is Jesus tucks them in, invites them along.
Right. Right.
Right?
Yes.
And just says, watch me and follow me, right? It's not like he's just saying, you stop doing that.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
It's more of this just constant invitation, constant showing of different ways to live with what they struggle with individually.
Right. And they all individually struggle differently from what we see in the Gospels.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So I'm wondering, how do you handle relationships when someone you know or love is struggling emotionally or mentally? Like, what would we offer to our audience of how to handle relationships when someone they know or love is struggling?
Right. Simple answer, but hard. Love, support, and boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we'll unpack those a little bit more probably later.
Yes, right, in our next video. Yeah.
And then what about individually? Like, what about if we have someone in the audience that's like connecting with some of the things we've said on the continuums? Like, what if they're struggling individually? Like, how can they take care or feel what they can do when they feel like they're struggling?
So, if you have someone who is safe and supportive, and you may know who they are. This is someone who listens to you, understanding, not trying to fix, that can help walk with you. You feel safe with them. Please go to them first. And they may have multiple. Some people have nobody.
Right.
So I realize I'm talking to some folks that have nobody. And so in that situation, what do you do? If you're, you can go to a professional and they can help with you with this journey and walk alongside of you to try to help you in that same way. But it's really important that you do get support in some way.
Right. Mm-hmm. I want to add to that, Neil, because I would say I always tell people interview your therapist.
Yes, that's
right?
awesome. And I do a 15-minute, like if I fit, I don't fit,
yes.
that's great.
Yes, and I even tell people, hey, like if I don't feel like the good fit for you, like let me know.
Yeah, I'll help you.
I want to help connect you because I want to connect you to someone.
Right.
And so I want to say that sometimes people have bad experiences in therapy.
Yes, and we've got a whole podcast.
Sure.
I've heard people have.
Sure.
Yes.
And so it's okay if you go and it didn't feel like a safe place. Don't give up. There are safe spaces, and so if I think that's the most important thing I wanted to share.
No,
is
I
just
appreciate
don't
you.
give up
Yes.
and keep looking for support and keep trying to find that support.
Right. And as therapists, we want you to get the help you need. And so a therapist, if you're going to a therapist and it's not fitting, or maybe it's just a season and you got what you needed from that therapist, it's okay to tell your therapist, and please tell them.
Yes.
If you don't, that's okay. But to tell them, like, hey, I think that we've done it. Could you help me find someone, or you can find someone else? So the thing is, we are concerned about you. Whatever you need in your journey to get where you need to go. That's what most therapists are concerned about.
Yeah, and I would even say if you don't feel good about starting with a therapist, there's lots of group therapy options that might feel better.
Yes, right.
So.
And I've got some people that will go to Al-Anon or they'll go to grief groups or different like that, and they don't feel so alone.
Yes. Yeah, which can be just as powerful.
Yes, could be just as powerful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
This was really a sweet time talking through.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much for sharing what you did on mental illness and spirituality. That felt like such a sweet moment. Thank you for that.